Saipan is booming. You can see new construction projects just about everywhere. But there's another side to this island, a dimly lit world of nightclubs called buy-me drinky bars because of the women who hustle customers for what are called ladies' drinks, often high-priced Kool-Aid. Most of the women who work in these bars are recruited from the Philippines. They come here hoping to save up money for a better life, but often they're forced into a lifestyle that may shock you.
He said he gonna give us good condition, but during the sleeping hours, he tried to, I don't know how to say that in English. In Tagalog, it is naninilip, looking at our bodies. And if we have the chance, he tried to, if he has the chance, he tried to touch us sometimes. So is that a good condition? We don't have a good condition inside the barracks. Sleeping time, we don't have the right to sleep good, in a good condition. You're thinking, you're just dreaming when you wake up, somebody's touching you and it is your boss.
Cable news videotaped 3 former waitresses for this story, although they didn't want their identities revealed. It's estimated there have been at least 20 judgments against bar owners or out-of-court settlements between them and their waitresses in the past few years here. Often the complaints are exactly the same. Women who come here expecting to be restaurant waitresses are forced to sell drinks to bar customers. Owners is intimidation.
They scaring you that if you will not, you will not get the, you will not reach the quota, you will gonna send back to PI.
And did you know that it was going to be like this when you were in PI?
No.
What did you think it was going to be like?
It's a restaurant. Serving the customer, collecting the payments, like that.
But bar owners say they have their reasons. This man, In Q, owns the VIP nightclub. He admits his waitresses may not leave their living quarters without a supervisor, but he says it's for their own safety and that he's just protecting his investment and his sole source of income. But when asked about the apparent illegality of his waitress's living arrangement, he said he didn't understand. Meanwhile, the women inside the bar say they have no freedom and no days off. They use some of the exact same words to describe their situations as the ones we interviewed. And one of those words is prisoner.
I don't have freedom. Nothing. Because I'm always starving. You don't have, you cannot use your own right. Since I know this is a U.S., part of a U.S., you have your own right to do whatever you want. You have your own freedom. But it didn't happen to us. They treat us like a slave.
Because when I was in PI, I have the freedom. I can talk, I can walk, I can go anywhere. But here, it's like a prisoner. I'm like a prisoner with a prison guard.
Another nightclub with Filipino waitresses is called No Kalimi. It's on the 2nd floor of this building. When asked over the phone about restricting his waitresses' movements, owner Mike Sablon first said it was for their own safety and that he was trying to provide them with good judgment until they're used to the island. He refused to be interviewed on camera, but later he changed his story, saying that his waitresses were allowed to come and go as they please. Sablon says he advises his waitresses to use good judgment, to be careful not to get pregnant, and not to forget their responsibilities to their families in the Philippines. He also points out that while many nightclub waitresses claim the owners won't let them leave, they're often using that as an excuse to avoid customers who want to date them. But when bar owners do refuse to let their employees leave home on their days off, it's a crime called false imprisonment. Still, most false imprisonment cases are civil cases in which groups of waitresses often sue their boss. Tomorrow, in part 2 of this series, we'll show you what happens when the Buy Me Drinky girls take their bosses to court. On Saipan, Kirk Chason, Cable News.
Because when we are sleeping, our employer or the nephew of our employer going inside the rooms. Sometimes they're peeping Then when we were taking our clothes or we were changing our clothes, they were watching you inside the rooms.
This is the type of complaint you often see in the court records. Waitresses who claim their bosses have abused them and forced them to live in substandard living conditions.
Crowded, hot, and it's not a good place. You know, as for me, the way my house, our house in PI in the Philippines is not like that. So I was thinking when he interviewed me in PI in the Philippines, he said a lot of good words. You know, your housing and everything is fine. You're gonna like it. When I came here, it's all terrible. You know.
One of the most recent bars involved in a court case here is the Star Lounge. Earlier this month, a local court awarded 2 former waitresses a $600,000 default judgment. The owner of the bar is a Korean national who speaks virtually no English, so he could not comment on the decision, and his attorney has withdrawn from the case. But while $600,000 may seem to be a lot of money, the waitress's attorney, Jim Grizzard, says in most cases the women don't collect the entire amount of the judgment.
In some cases, they just don't pay, and then you do what's called an order in aid of judgment. You try to get the money out of them, and they plead poverty. And they've transferred their assets to a brother or cousin or sister and say they're no longer in business and they have no money. And others, they've actually gotten on the airplane and just flown away.
Grizzard says the waitresses who've left the Star Lounge have reached an out-of-court settlement with their former boss, $4,800 and one-way tickets back to the Philippines. In the meantime, the bar continues to operate, just like several others that have lost civil suits and survived. In November of 1984, 14 waitresses sued Oh Kwang-hun, the owner of what was then called the OB Club, and each of the girls was awarded damages ranging from a few $100s to more than $10,000. But the OB Club is now the MBC Club, and it's operated by O's wife. She admits that 10 girls live in a room behind the bar, but she insists they are allowed to come and go as they please. She says the judge was wrong in the 1984 suit. Of course, not all the nightclubs on the island mistreat their waitresses, but many of the women who come here from the Philippines are restricted in their movements during their non-working hours. That can be a crime called false imprisonment, but it is not something that the Attorney General's office here actively investigates. Assistant Attorney General Eric Smith.
We're not set up to do that. That is a function of an investigative staff. And we do not have investigators to carry out that function. So it would be an attorney on his own may look into something if he was given a report, but that's not our normal duties.
Smith says the Attorney General's office would handle worker mistreatment cases that are reported to the AG or to the police. So who's supposed to take an active role in protecting the workers? The Department of Labor, where Deputy Director Jack Torres says investigators are looking into 6 claims of non-payment of wages. Tomorrow, in Part 3 of this series, we'll ask Torres why false imprisonment and non-payment of wages cases keep popping up and what the Department of Labor is doing about it. On Saipan, Kirk Chason, Cable News. How can the Department of Labor justify accepting all these different employment contracts, realizing that in most cases they're going to go into the same type of bar that's been known and is commonly known to perpetuate things such as non-payment of wages or false imprisonment?
Well, I don't believe that that statement is accurate now. In that, if you've seen the history of these cases, you see a drastic reduction in the number of cases that have been filed, for instance, in 1985-86 as compared to the heydays of from 1982 to 1984. You see now a realization by a lot of the employers that they can't do these things.
The Deputy Director of the CNMI Department of Labor, Jack Torres, says his office is now looking into 6 claims by nightclub waitresses of non-payment of wages. He says at least once in the past, the department has prevented a bar owner from recruiting new Filipino waitresses for a year. That was after an investigation into a non-payment claim. This is how the Department of Labor and the courts often catch employers at not paying their waitresses. It's an employment contract spelling out the waitress's job duties and her working hours, for example, in this case, from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. Now, when the waitress has to do work outside of what's called for or spelled out in this contract, that's a violation. And one of the women we've interviewed says she knows what that's like.
You cannot go out. You're going to do what he wants you to do, like cleaning his car, cleaning his house, doing facial and everything and blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry about that. And there's a lot of job that I was doing too.
You have to do other jobs.
Asides, yes. So I was working with him, not getting paid, of course. I thought I'm going to get paid, and it didn't happen.
About 4 years ago, the CNMI legislature passed a Non-Resident Workers Act. It called for the Department of Labor to finalize health and safety standards that would apply to nightclub waitresses and other foreign laborers. Torres says last year his department issued proposed regulations, but that upcoming changes in the CNMI labor laws delayed their finalization. He says in the meantime, labor investigators can apply public health regulations to the bars on their unannounced inspections. But one attorney who has represented several former waitresses in lawsuits, Mary Beth Harold, says the nightclub industry would be better off with the Labor Department standards.
Well, it makes me upset in a lot of ways because without meaningful regulation, it just means that more and more people will probably be complaining about their living and working conditions. It'll be a source of lawsuits and time and energy expended on it when it could all be avoided if we had some regulation and enforcement of those regulations.
Torres says that overall, he does not believe most nightclub waitresses on Saipan are being mistreated. He says some have legitimate claims, some don't, and that there are few bar owners who repeatedly violate the law. He says part of the problem is that the owners themselves are often from foreign countries.
You have Koreans who may not be familiar with the system here, and they may be used to a system in for instance in Korea that are not okay here in the Commonwealth, but you don't see repeat too often.
Torres says another problem comes with forcing American standards on people from different cultures. But one of the attorneys who often represents the waitresses, Jim Grizzard, estimates that as many as 75% of the local nightclubs may be mistreating their waitresses. He says he sees no end in sight to the system unless something is done to change the recruiting process in the Philippines. Grizzard says right now that process leads to women coming to work here not realizing what their jobs will actually be. In the meantime, because local regulations are enforced primarily through complaints, any pressure to change the system will have to be applied by the women themselves. On Saipan, Kirk Chason, Cable News.